And that leads us nicely into our friend Tori Amos and the album Under the Pink. So, you like that transition there, Matt?
Love
Because
it.
I think we are going to go with Matt as the cornflake girl of our podcast.
If you want to explain to me what that song's about during your bio, that would be great.
I will, because there's layers to that song, Matt. We'll
I'm
talk
sure.
about that when we get into. Oh yeah. Well, with Tori Amos, there's always layers, right?
Yeah.
So speaking of cornflake girl, you heard it in the montage, and now you're going to hear a clip of the other big single off of this album, God.
God, sometimes you just don't come through. You need a woman to look after you. God, sometimes you just don't come through.
Yeah, go ahead and run those
Okay.
numbers. I'm sorry.
I thought I cut out there. No problem. Under the Pink by Tori Amos comes in at number 264 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 42 in 1994, number 1,447 of all time. It's Tori Amos' second highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, behind 1992's Little Earthquakes, which we have covered already. Under the Pink did not make Rolling Stone's list, and Tori Amos ranked number 287 of overall artists on Best Ever Albums.
Yep, very critically acclaimed artist, and this is her second album, unless you count that "Why Can't Tori Read" album that we talked about in the review before, which I think she and most will agree does not exist. So we're gonna go with "Little Earthquakes" as her debut album, even though I guess technically it is not. This album was certified double. You like that?
I forgot. That's an amazing album cover.
It was
Why
basically
Can't
like
Tori-
the. Yes, it's an amazing album cover. It's like, it's so weird to think of like mass marketing Tori Amos as like a sexy,
Wow.
80s
Like
singer.
dominatrix
Not that she
hair
isn't.
me-
Yeah, not that she isn't a pretty woman. When I'm saying sexy, I'm not
this is
saying it's,
different.
but it's more just, like she's kind of like, she looks like Taylor Dane or somebody, which makes me,
It
who I
looks
love
like something
too.
that it looks like something that like Saturday Night Live or like some sketch comedy
Yes.
did like a joke
Yeah.
of Tori Amos, the least likely incarnation of Tori Amos.
And I mean, and we see this with Alanis Morissette too, right? She's got like these
Right.
weird like child albums that like Bjork too. Remember, she was released an album. She was like 10, right? And so anyway, I guess that's a thing. But
Paste had an article about that album recently, back in
the
August.
Bjork 10-year-old album, or
No, the Why Can't Tori
Why
Read?
Can't Tori
That
Read?
why it jogged my memory when you brought it up. I was like, oh.
the fact that it's a Y, right? It's the letter.
Yeah.
Y. Anyway, we're not doing Why Can't Tori Read. We
well,
are
and
doing
everything's
Under the Pink.
misspelled in there, which is hence she
Yes.
can't read, so she's misspelling
Yes.
everything too. So yeah.
There's no subtext. It's just text in that one. So this is we'll call it her second studio album. It was released in January of 1994. It debuted atop the UK albums chart and charted in the top 5 in the US chart. It was double platinum in the US by October 1999, and it did have a top 15 single in the US for Tori Amos, and that was Cornflake Girl, which we talked about before. And yeah, so it sold well, and this was sort of like when Tori Amos moved from, a well-received first album where she built a following to kind of crossing over into the mainstream, I would say. This album was a lyrics album, which means, Matt, you probably missed half of what she was going for. That's okay. We'll talk about
Wait,
this. So
she was singing on this? There's vocals on this?
well, it was
What?
specifically designed, right, for the lyrics to
Through.
be both cryptic but also like invite you into kind of to be put out there, right, to provoke thought-provoking type of ideas. And also she decided to expand her influences a little bit in terms of the piano she played, but also sort of different musical styles around the piano she was playing. Those were sort of stated goals for her as well. She went on tour on this album from February through November 1994, and that is really when people think of like diehard Tori Amos fans, right? It wasn't they didn't exist before that, but that was the sort of the radicalizing event for many people. Lots of people saw her during that tour. It was a worldwide tour, so it grew her audience as well. She was covering songs as well. She was doing like Little Drummer Boy. She was doing Joni Mitchell's A Case of You. She was doing Losing My Religion. So she kind of got known as a great cover artist. There's, of course, a famous version of her doing, I think it Smells Like Teen Spirit, maybe? by Nirvana along this time. This album was recorded in Taos, New Mexico, in a hacienda. So 90s continues to be the second best decade for album locations behind the 60s, which I don't, and early 70s, right? Which I don't think will ever be, because people were doing shit like stripping wall stuff off to have sounds like the Stooges or
Being
mobile vans. Yeah, Castle. I mean, that was peak thing. But the 90s is proving to be sort of a renaissance for that. The album artwork has Native American and New Mexico references, so that is a little bit thematically what they're going for. If you think of location as character, I wouldn't say it's specifically set in New Mexico and Native American spaces. Tori Amos has that thing too, where you're never, because her tracks are very confessional, right? But also, you're never sure if she's singing about herself or not, and because they're confessional, but she embodies characters. And, I'm sure we will all make reference to something later, but there's some thematic similarities to some other female singer-songwriters there. There's other little bits and pieces. I don't mean to undersell Tori Amos's bio, but we did a pretty comprehensive one for Little Earthquakes, and we are going to do her next album, her third album as well, which comes 2 years later. So we'll be able to kind of connect the threads right there. So, Under the Pink, an album, as you heard from my sister earlier, that was a seminal album for my sister in her young adolescence. Matt, does it hold up for you like it does for my sister?
Probably not.
Oh, okay. As in, like, you didn't like it, or just I think the inspiration was higher there?
I didn't. It's not that I didn't like it. So I'm kind of mixed on it. I think there's moments on here that are just great. Like, and you're right. Was I paying attention too much to the lyrics? No, I wasn't. I'm here for the music for most of the time. I can recognize that, like, I think her lyrics, the times I might be quote unquote paying attention to them, they sound interesting, right? It doesn't necessarily mean I'm like really like focusing on the messages or whatever, but like it's clear that she's a good lyricist. Like, I think I like, just on a surface level I can tell that. But so I'm here more for the music and I think it starts really well. Like, I do like Pretty Good Year. I do like God. I like kind of the songs that aren't as stripped down, I guess, probably more. So songs like Past the Mission. I think The Waitress is a really cool, there's like just in the middle of that, they come in with this full band and guitar, like heavy kind of guitar part. It's like, whoa, that was cool, right? She's throwing different things out there. Cornflake Girl isn't, musically is a very easy song to get into for me. But I find when she kind of strips it down and it becomes, with her and the piano, like, well, I guess Bells for Her, I don't know if that's piano, like it's like the chimes kind of thing, I guess, whatever the instrument is there.
Bell sound.
Yeah, like Bells for Her, right? Yeah. Bell sound. Or Baker or Icicle, like songs like those. I think they on one hand, there's elements of it that I find pretty. But there's also elements of them that I find a little jarring at the same time. It's very it's not a sound that I typically like. It's weird because it's intense, I think, is what's happening, and it's a little bit hard for me to get into because I find it slightly off-putting. Not because she's got a bad voice or because she's a bad piano player. It's just the nature. It's like a very kind of, there's a real somber quality to it, and I find it a little jarring and hard to really connect with, I guess. And it's one of those things I just chalk up to, this isn't really the type of sound that generally I'm looking for, which is interesting. And I can't really say beyond it, because there's plenty of piano players that are just doing piano and singing singer-songwriters with pianos that I'm fine with. It's just sometimes with her, the emotional resonance, it's almost like too much at times for me to take, and it just doesn't connect with me as much. Like, and a song like Yes, Anastasia, it's like 9.5 minutes long. It closes out the album, and it's just by that time I'm like, I don't need 9.5 minutes of that song. So there's songs on here that I'm like, that are to me that are skippable to be honest. But there's songs on here that I'm like, no, I like when she kind of brings more of the band into it, or she peps it up a little bit. She throws different things at it. It's more than just her and the piano. Although Icicle, I think, I probably like that one the best of those types of songs. That one probably stood out to me. That was the one that I liked the most. I also thought The Wrong Band was kind of an interesting. That was almost like a show tune kind of song, like this bouncy show tune thing. That was a little bit I could have done without that. Like show tunes in my rock music or my popular music, it's not something that I gravitate towards either. So it's a mixed bag for me here. I know people love Tori Amos and are probably like, just clenching their pearls right now listening to me talk about this. But I get why she's popular. My sister's very much into her, and when I talk to her about this, she's like, oh, like she's like this this expression of just like of undying love for Tori Amos, and I get it. It's just at times and I feel like when she's really stripped down, it's just not connecting with me on that level. So it's kind of a mid album for me. But I think when she hits, I would like her to do, for my own personal taste, I like it when she is a little bit more, not even upbeat, but there's more heft to the songs. It's more than just her and the piano, and there's other things that she's throwing in there, which I think when she does it quite well, and I think it keeps things interesting. So yeah, I'm kind of torn. I'm a little bit in the middle on this record, guys.
I really like this album, but it's. I don't think I liked it as much as Little Earthquakes. I definitely hear the expansion of kind of the piano styles and sounds. That was pretty apparent throughout, especially on songs like God or The Wrong Band, Waitress, Cornflake Girl. They all kind of have different aspects to them that expands her sound outside of just her and a piano. Like I think you said The Wrong Band. I wrote it down as like a jaunty beat. It is like kind of an uplifting type of sound. Waitress has this really interesting industrial feel to it, industrial beat in the background. And then Cornflake Girl, I wrote down like as like a Western sound, Western like Wild West sounding sound to it. I think the production's really good on this album as well. I like when the strings are an interesting addition and effective. Sometimes I feel like on her songs on this album, they start out sparse, but then they like really build to like an explosion of like a lot of instruments at once, and I thought that was really effective. I thought God I hadn't heard any of these songs before. Even I don't think I was familiar with Cornflake Girl.
Not even God either.
Neither of them. So I was really fresh, and like the variety as a result. I tried to pay attention to the lyrics because I don't want to give short shrift to that, especially since John said that's kind of like a fundamental thing to her to this album that she said. And so I thought that her songs are like, they are like stories, but they're also can be interpreted different ways. Like a song like Icicle was like she was singing like to an icicle, but it's not really about the icicle, if that makes sense. And the Cornflake Girl also had kind of an interesting story structure to it. I thought the Yes Anastasia song, While Long, I thought she was going to be writing about the Russian Queen Anastasia, but she wasn't, to my historical Russian history disappointment. And I think my favorite song on the album though is Past the Mission. That may be kind of the most basic. Maybe that's the most basic. Do you recognize
the background vocalist?
No.
It's a good friend of hers.
Oh, who is it? I did not recognize.
One and only Trent Reznor.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that makes sense. They are kind of like interesting music.
They're musical beats. Spirit animals, more so when you think about it than you initially would think. Yeah.
I feel like I'm not doing a good job of describing why I like this album. I think the piano is pretty. I think she mixes it up a lot and isn't just her and a piano, which can sound like formal or cold at times to me, even though a piano can have a warm sound to it. I think there's a variety on here that I liked, and it just didn't like blow me away in the same way that Little Earthquakes did. So it's a thumbs up, but not like an over enthusiastic one.
So Tori Amos is kind of her own thing, but also if you want to reduce it, which I'm hesitant to do, because this isn't like when we talked about that Elastic album where we said it was like an homage where there were clearly lifts of other songs, right? But it is pretty safe to say that kind of what Tori Amos does in these first two albums is a little bit of the self-confession of Joni Mitchell and the interest in exploring different genres, mixed with sort of that idea that Kate Bush brings of sort of painting a soundscape and embodying characters. I think the difference is that while Kate Bush sort of always keeps a removed distance and stays in the characters, and Joni Mitchell is sort of like always pretty much her, right? Self-confessional. Like Tori Amos sometimes clearly is in like her own character, like Icicle is sort of another reconciling with sexual assault song. And she famously, of course, you know, is very open about the fact that she was a victim. I mean, it's hard in Little Earthquake, you know, like, you know, Me and a Gun, right, is basically her telling the story of that. And then there's other things like Cornflake Girl, where she takes the concept of... So Cornflake Girl is an interesting one because it was a term that she and her friends used to describe like what we would call basics nowadays, right? Like people that, you know, had basic taste, but also like they'd be nice to your face, but they'd kind of, you know, disparage you or hurt you behind the scenes. And that song actually is about female genital mutilation. And so,
Wow.
I mean, if you take it out to the farthest extent, right, it's, you know, a lot of these people, she was reading an article and it was like they were betrayed by, you know, other women they loved, right? Like were the people that led them to it happening. So took this idea of like, she and her friends would call people cornflake girls, right? And then they kind of, the larger idea, right, of being betrayed by those you love. You know, God is sort of a subversive song, right, about like, you know, you sure don't come through a lot, God, you know, even though you're supposed to be omnipresent, you know, like, and it's jaunty in its own way, which it makes me laugh a little bit. The lyrics on this album are very strong. I know some people don't like the fact that it's a little bit more obscure and they feel like some people will say she's trying too hard. I never have felt that way about her. I just feel that in this period, it's like not really a knock that people get anymore because the concept of being self-confessional, especially for a female, is like baked into what you do, right, as an artist to some degree. But there still was an element like where, still to this day, as we've talked about quite a bit, like there still was an element of like if you were being self-confessional, you were being too emotional, and thus you couldn't be writing about serious themes. And you know, it's one of these things like if you're a guy and you're writing about your breakup, it's like it's an added emotional resonance, right? But if you're a woman and you're writing about, you know, these things, it's sort of like, you know. Anyway, I won't get into that. But I what I love about this album, and I like this album just as much as Little Earthquakes, I love the ambitiousness of the compositions of this album. To me, this is like the Tori Amos that was like the prodigy of the piano at like age 7, right? Yeah. You know, just the composition chances she uses here, like sort of how she plays the piano, and it can serve as like a rock instrument at times, how it can go into traditional non-popular music forms, like almost like show tunes or jaunty sort of saloon songs at times, how it get very soft and concert hall-y at times, how it almost is like abrasive at times, how she plays it, and then how she's bringing in certain songs like reggae themes and other songs sort of like a big band feel to it. There's definitely a rock feel. I think it's funny that she brings in Trent Reznor, who is a friend of hers, and they it's often said that they would talk and like collaborate, kind of, they brought, you know, kind of similar but also saw the world just enough different, they kept each other, you know, interested in things. But it's funny the song she brings him in on, because it starts like really, you know, like very like you imagine Nine Inch Nails. But then when you read the song, it's another song, right? I'm sorry, I had mentioned before, and I misspoke. I had mentioned before the Icicle was the sexual assault song. It's actually Past the Mission. I apologize. Icicle is a different theme. I'm sorry. So go backwards if you've been listening. I apologize. Tori Amos fans are famously fanatical, so if you've gotten this far, I apologize. Yeah.
Well, they turned off after they heard my take. They're like, this clown doesn't know what he's talking about.
Well, I mean, famous female hater Matt, as we've talked about many times on this podcast. He just the female.
Oh, I forgot to say I hate Elastica too, because there's 3 women in Elastica. Yeah.
I just like that joke over and over again because you can never shake that one off. You have to respond. Anyway, but no, getting back on topic right here. I really do think this is an excellent album. I've grown to appreciate over the years what Tori Amos represents, which is she's a very unique female artist in that she is so feminine that most women I know can connect with her both in a personal, overtly traditional feminine way, but also in a murky, dark sort of like that idea of like, when you find out that most of the people who watch crime podcasts are women, and you're like, well, why is that the case? Because women commit so much less crime. But there's that idea of wanting to understand the darkness, but also wanting to be nurturers, and stuff. Like Tori Amos to me has always sort of represented like that dichotomy a little bit. Plus with the fact that she's a virtuoso, right, on the piano as an instrument. I mean, her just at the most simple things. I like the piano choices she makes and the composition she puts together. And I like the fact that her albums always have a great deal of variety. And that's big for me because piano-based albums, if they start to sound the same, can lose me. But the great artists who utilize the piano, Tori Amos, someone like Elton John, right? Those are the artists that sort of stand the time. They take the piano and make it like a weapon of their choice, kind of. And I always respect that because all too often I feel like the piano can be like a trope, right? And it doesn't transcend beyond that. So strong thumbs up for me. I think I'm higher on this album than you guys are. It's hard for me to pick between the two albums because I do feel there's significant differences between both of them while also keeping a sort of essence of who Tori Amos is. But you could tell she was looking to make something more complex on this album. But the irony is like arguably 2 of her 3 biggest hits are on this album. So go figure, right?
Yeah.
I think Crucify is probably the only song that's as big, right, to the mainstream as either God or Cornflake are on this album.
Yeah.
So